What if, during the heart of the Vietnam War, a Marine unit had to face off not only against Viet Cong, but a mad Russian general and some of the most vicious, most hungry dinosaurs you've ever come across? Does that sound interesting? Well, then let's kick in the door. What the... Welcome to the first episode of Ink and Ammo, Books with a Body Count. Today, we're talking about Primitive War I, Opiate Undertow by Ethan Pettus. So a Green Beret unit goes missing in a Vietnamese valley, and General Jericho calls in Vulture Squad to go find them. This isn't Vulture Squad's normal type of assignment. Usually they're going into POW camps and freeing prisoners of war from the Viet Cong. But General Jericho wants what he perceives as the best, and he calls Vulture Squad in to go look for his missing Green Berets. Vulture Squad is led by Captain Ryan Baker, who's leading Vulture Squad not because he's the best man for the job, but because he's the only man for the job. He's the last man standing after the original Vulture Squad had been completely wiped out except for him. And neither we nor Ryan himself is really sure he should be leading the squad. He has demons and issues and a lot of insecurities. So Vulture Squad heads to General Jericho's home base, and they are given their assignment. Reluctantly, they take it. But there's a lot more going on than just searching for missing Green Berets. A transport truck has been captured carrying some radioactive materials that shouldn't be there, and hints at something a hell of a lot deeper. And we find out pretty early what that is. It is a mad Russian general, Borodin, who's working with the Viet Cong, is building a particle collider in the valley in an attempt to create antimatter so he can create unlimited energy for the motherland. But not just that, he wants to create clean bombs. Nuclear weapons that have no radioactive fallout, so that they can take out America and move in and create the new Soviet world order. Vulture Squad's job is not only to find the Green Berets, but to investigate these man-made structures that have appeared in the valley. So they head in, and it doesn't take very long for them to find evidence that the Green Beret unit isn't missing, it's been destroyed. Not long after, Vulture Squad soldiers start disappearing, and pretty quickly we find out why. Dinosaurs! Vulture Squad ends up facing off against some of the most horrific, vicious dinosaurs you've ever seen. These dinosaurs are more of the modern take. They're the feathered and beaked and vicious and hungry kind. And they're hungry for man meat.
Phrasing.
I'm trying very hard not to smile. Baker and the Vulture Squad realize that they need to get out of that valley and back home. And along the way, they come across an AWOL Russian scientist who's been holed up in an abandoned bunker with nothing but his nightmares and a whole lot of heroin. So he may not be the best help to get them out of the valley, but they drag him along anyway. There's some pretty exciting events that lead to their escape from the valley, and this will lead you to the halfway point of the book. This feels like a natural stopping point for the book, but there is a second half, and it comes across almost like a two-part episode. Jericho makes a deal with Baker that he has 12 hours to find his missing soldier, and whether he finds him or not, he then has to turn his attention to destroying the particle accelerator. So whereas the first time they flew helicopters into the valley, this time they're taking boats upriver and going back, because they found out some dinosaurs can fly. And Baker and the refit Vulture Squad head back into the valley to face the dinosaurs, the Viet Cong, and the Russians all over again in an attempt to find the missing soldier and destroy General Borodin's particle collider. So there's your main plot. Let's get into some details. The overall feel of this book is one of dread. From beginning to end, you feel these soldiers are being stalked, whether it be by soldiers or the dinosaurs, and it's an oppressive, dark feeling all the way through the book, where you can almost feel the dread. There are horror authors who would kill to keep this kind of tension up in a book. Pretty much the whole thing feels like the climax of a horror movie. You get almost no break, no levity, no lift from that feeling. That's why the halfway point might be a good point to stop, take a moment, breathe, read something else, and then come back to it the next day, because it is really heavy. It is really dark and oppressive. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but for some people, that kind of tension can weigh on them, and they might need a moment of levity. If you're fine with it, read on. The characters, let's talk about the dinosaurs, the most important part of the book. There's about 9 different types of dinosaurs, and they are more of the feathered variety, the more modern take. They're feathered, beaked, vicious, hungry dinosaurs. They are relentless and just brutal. I thought Pettus did a really good job with these dinosaurs. They were interesting and fun, and absolutely brutal. Like I said, there's like 9 different types of dinosaur in this story, and they're all from different epochs and environments. And they shouldn't be together, but they are, and there is a reason, because science. And it makes sense once you get to a certain point. The soldiers in the book, Vulture Squad, are something you'd recognize. They're comfortable. They're not cliche, though. This isn't something where you go in and roll your eyes because you've seen it 100 times before. They're familiar, but they all have their own issues and twists. Yeah, there's the gung-ho and the alcoholic and the crazy one. One of the soldiers, the sniper, has severe mental illness. He's going farther and farther into a psychosis as the voices get louder and louder in his head. So it's not something you haven't seen before, but it's not a carbon copy of what's come before. General Jericho and General Borden are a little more over the top. Jericho is your prototypical military man, angry, shouting, demanding, always hiding something, where Borden is kind of a little bit of a mustache-twirling psychopath. So they're maybe a little over the top, but it's not a deal breaker. The action and the pacing is pretty good. Throughout the first half of the book, you have good action moments followed by short lulls and action again pretty consistently. The second half of the book, they're a little more drawn out with a little more exposition, a little more downtime, but not enough to ever get bored, but it still keeps up that constant dread, fear, and tension. Pettus dedicated this book to Michael Crichton, so he was obviously a fan, and he went in trying to write an over-the-top, fun, crazy adventure with vicious, violent dinosaurs, and that's what he did. You're not going into this looking for literary gold. What you find is an action story full of blood and guts and gore. But honestly, it doesn't feel excessive because of the situation they're in. They're in the middle of a war, they're battling dinosaurs, and the violence seems justified for the situation. I've seen authors who make violence almost a challenge, like they're trying to gross you out and force scenes that just don't work. This isn't like that. There is excessive violence and gore, but it fits what's happening in the story, and it makes sense. As far as Pettus' writing, it's very workmanlike, it's very to the point and clear. He uses very short sentences and keeps everything very neat and precise. I personally would have been okay if he had punched it up a little bit, if he had made it a little more evocative, but the writing conveys what he wants to say in a very direct, simple way. I thought the book was a lot of fun. There was a lot of action, a lot of interesting story. The premise is great. And how many people don't love a good dinosaur story? This book actually has a 4.06 at the time of filming on Goodreads, but I was more interested in the 1-star reviews because there's a few. And there's a whole lot of pearl clutching going on, and it kind of made me laugh.
You're really going to clutch your pearls, Senator.
And I was looking at some of them. For example, Camille states that it's a slog through a jungle mired in death, torture, and savagery committed by every character in this book. Okay, stop selling. I'm sold. And people seem to be upset that soldiers in Vietnam had committed atrocities and were suffering mental issues from it and suffering from PTSD. Sometimes I wonder if people even understand their history at all. Emily states that the book was not for her, and honestly, she's slightly concerned about the people who it is for. Again, now I'm intrigued. She makes a comment about this being a book for men in capitals with a trademark after it. I guess she's trademarking the word men, and upset that this book would fail the Bechdel test.
Just stop.
Yes, there's really only one female character in the book, and she's a very caring nurse, but you know there are no sex scenes in the book. Being upset because there isn't a lot of female characters in a book that takes place during the Vietnam War in a combat situation, during combat missions, seems a little ridiculous to me.
You're making my brain hurt.
If Pettus had forced women in just to fill a quota and make a statement, it would have felt wrong. It would have felt off, and he would have been called out for creating a situation where he was just trying to do something to appease a certain group. So yeah, there aren't a lot of women in this. There's only one female character. But considering the situation, it makes sense. They are in the middle of a combat mission in the jungle during the late 60s. This was the norm. It makes sense in the situation. So I thought I'd throw those out there in case you did have issues that would correspond to other people's complaints, then you'd know what they were. For me, I don't see what they mentioned as being a problem. They feel appropriate to the story. And I don't see Pettus is going out of his way to do something particularly horrendous. Yes, there's drug use. Yes, there's atrocities. Yes, there's violence and gore galore. This is what this book is. Okay, real quick cut in because even I make mistakes. let's talk about key assets. This book is an action horror book with little bit of sci-fi elements, not too far off the vein of course, Jurassic Park, or something like The Thing or Aliens, with a lot of action and intrigue and suspense. If you like those books, you might like this. So the key asset for this is it's U.S. Marines versus the Viet Cong versus mad Russians and versus very hungry dinosaurs. Its selling point is very clear. Now let's give it a rating. So this book was a lot of fun. It was just what it said it was going to be. A violent tour de force of dinosaurs versus soldiers. And it delivered on what it said. The missteps might be that the second half did feel a little bit drawn out and was not quite as fun as the first half. And the writing could be punched up a little bit. But overall, I had a blast with this book. I really enjoyed it, and I do highly recommend it. I thought it was a really good book with some minor flaws that didn't seem to really take away from my overall enjoyment, because by the end, I was happy I read it. So I am going to give this, on a scale of 1 to 5, a 3.75, right between Sustained Fire and Bulletstorm. And I do suggest you pick it up and read it. Now, as far as redeployment, can you go back into this world? Yes, this is a part 1. It is followed up by 2 short story collections that play off what happens at the end of the story, and then a book 2 that follows up these short stories. So if you want to go back into this world, you can. I have already picked up the first short story collection, and will probably continue reading it because I did enjoy it. And I get a feeling that his writing will improve, and the story is definitely interesting enough to hold my attention for a little bit more. So I hope you enjoyed this review and got something out of it. I plan to continue doing Ink and Ammo, showing off books that are full of action and adventure, books that are just fun without all the fluff and nonsense, books that will inspire you to read and just have a good time. So please come back and I'll continue making these. Let me know if there's anything you want to see, anything you want to hear about. Let me know if you have any action adventure books that you'd recommend for me. Please do me a favor and subscribe. And I'm going to go start work on the next Ink and Ammo, because I ain't got time to bleed.
You're hit. You're bleeding, man.
I ain't got time to bleed.